Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Reading 3 Online. Well, this is our first Tuesday together, and before I get into what we're going to talk about today, I want to just give you sort of an understanding of why. Why did I choose the things that I've chosen for us to work with over the next few weeks and who knows, months? We'll find out. But I've taught most of you now for long enough to know that you're good readers. So I was thinking, what do you need aside from being good readers? And I think the answer is that I want to help you be smarter readers. So there's a difference between being a good reader, knowing how to pronounce words, knowing how to read aloud, knowing how to read to yourself. But smart reading is using explicit strategies. What I mean by that is a smart reader does things in their head that they may not be completely aware of. They just do because they've gotten used to them. But I want to make explicit, or in other words, spell it out for you, what some of those implicit or unspoken, unnoticed skills are. So, thought about it. I came up with 6 main reading skills that will make you smarter readers, as well as going over the mechanics of language to make you both better readers and better writers. So, why did I decide to go the reading skills route instead of what we may have done in class a lot, which was tape practice? Well, first of all, I think my job is to make you employable, not to help you pass a test. So these skills are going to help you in everyday life, whether you're reading a book or a magazine or a rental agreement or a contract. So they're a little more useful than things like, what is the main idea of this passage? And once you get these skills under your belt and you can, pull them out and use them, you are going to be able to pass that test. You are going to find out what the main idea of that passage is because you're reading smarter. So, that is my plan, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the coming weeks. So, Tuesdays, we're going to focus on mechanics of writing. Specifically, today and for the next few weeks at least, punctuation. So I've noticed that a lot of you, when you read aloud, you sort of skim over the punctuation. You don't really pay attention to where the commas and periods and semicolons and colons and apostrophes are. And I'm a grammar nerd, so we're going to learn about punctuation. And it's going to help you understand, comprehend what you're reading better if you know what to do when you see a comma, for instance. So we're going to start there. And we're going to start with the most misused, I'm going to say, tool of writing, and that is the comma. People stick commas in everywhere where they do not belong. And they do not put them in places where they do belong because people don't understand the rules of using commas. Well, let's talk about that for a bit, shall we? So commas. Commas are used for a variety of reasons. One of them you may have heard is when you come to a comma, you are to pause reading. Just a short pause, not a long pause, But why do you pause? You pause so that you can do a quick self-monitoring technique, which we'll get to later in our courses, and make sure you understand what you've read so far. So you pause, just as long as it takes to look at the rest of the sentence and make sure, okay, I got that. We're moving on to the next part of the sentence. So when you're reading aloud, you definitely want to pause at a comma and check your understanding. But when you're reading to yourself, you want to do the same thing. You want to have a silent pause in your silent reading. So that's the first main thing that I want you to know, is that when you get to a comma, it usually means pause here. Do you get it? Okay, we're going to move on. It breaks the text into chunks that are easier to understand. And in a way, it also draws together the different parts of the sentence. So, there are several times that you have to use commas. There are some times when it's up to you whether you use a comma or not, but there are some times when you have to use commas. One that is probably the first one you think of is in a list. So if you're listing 3 or more things, you need to have commas between them. That just helps differentiate the items in the list. Another time that you need to use commas is before a conjunction. So we talked a little about conjunctions toward the end of our time together on Center. Conjunctions are things like and, but, or, because, and what they do is basically join 2 things together. What we would call phrases or clauses together. And before you use a conjunction, you put a comma before it, because you really want to make sure that you're understanding the first phrase or clause before you move on to the second phrase or clause. So what is a phrase? What is a clause? A phrase is something that has a noun, basically, usually a subject, but no predicate, no verb. So it's not a complete sentence. It's just a phrase. And it would be a fragment if you put a period after it and just left it. So instead, you use these conjunctions to join them to the rest of the sentence. But with phrases, a lot of times it comes down to, is this phrase essential for the sentence? Or can the sentence mean the same thing if we take out the phrase that is separated by that comma? So that's another rule of thumb, especially if you're writing, but also when you're reading and checking to make sure you understand what's going on, is that the phrase may be taken out of the sentence, and the sentence is still a sentence. It still makes sense. But the phrase adds a little more meaning, helps you understand it a little better, maybe makes it more specific, things like that. A clause is basically a complete sentence. It's got a subject and a predicate, a noun and a verb. So anything that you can break down into a noun and a verb, that's going to be a clause. So you don't have to remember all the names probably, but an independent clause is a sentence that stands on its own. Completely understand what it says just by reading the clause. A dependent clause means that you need more information for it to make perfect sense. And those are the ones that you're going to find often joined with conjunctions and therefore commas. So, commas in a list, commas before conjunctions. Okay, so commas, we're going to pause, make sure we understand what's going on, right? There are a couple other um, lesser used ways to use commas. One is what they call the direct address. That means if I'm addressing my sentence to a specific person. So if I say, Edwin, please read us the next paragraph, then I need to put a comma after Edwin. Okay? So if you're talking to someone specific, you use their name at the beginning of the sentence, then comma until the rest of the sentence. It's a way to sort of catch their attention, right? Oh, me? What? Oh, read the next paragraph. Okay, got it. I'm going to have you do some IXL work for your homework. It's actually not going to be due till Friday, so you've got plenty of time to do it, but they're going to use all kinds of weird phrases about compound sentences, complex sentences, compound complex sentences, things like that. I don't want to fill your head with lots of weird terms. So I'm going to say maybe two other ways you could use commas and leave it at that. One is to replace the word and. Sometimes when you've got two things that you would want to put and in the middle of, you can replace them with a comma. And that's just does this make sense by itself question. So if I leave it without commas, does it make sense, or is the meaning changed? Which is the second and the last thing that I wanted to say, is that you use commas sometimes just to help things make sense. So if you read over a sentence with a comma and without a comma and it means two different things, you need to know which to use. Famous example of this is the sentence, let's eat mother. So let's eat, comma, mother. It's like a direct address, right? But it's at the end of the sentence. Fine. So you need a comma to separate it from the rest of the sentence, the word mother. If you don't use that comma and you say let's eat mother, then we're talking about cannibalism, and that's something very different than calling your mother to dinner. So when it needs to make sense, it needs to mean a specific thing that it's not going to mean if you don't put the comma in. That's the best rule of thumb of when to use a comma. And that can be discretionary, meaning it can be up to you when you use them. But, big but, don't put commas everywhere in your writing. Yes, you can use discretionary commas, but the word discretionary means you're using discretion. You're not just using them every time. You're thinking, again, smarter reading, smarter writing about, okay, do I need it here? And if you need it, then you use it. Otherwise, leave it alone. People put so many commas in things where they do not belong. And one big mistake to look out for, probably the worst in terms of how many times you see it, mistakes people make with commas, is called the comma splice, which means that you're putting two clauses together, two sentences, but you're not using your conjunction, and, but, or, because. If you just put a comma between the two clauses, it's a no-go. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. You need to make it either two separate sentences or put that conjunction in there. And okay, maybe I'll give you one last use of a comma and leave it at that. Interjections, which again we talked about very briefly, but an interjection is something like oh, or wow, or just a word like that that doesn't really mean too much, except, oh, I'm surprised by that, Oh, comma, and then the rest of the clause, the rest of the sentence. So that's another place where you're going to use commas, is after interjections. If you're really serious about your interjection, you really want to say, wow, or ouch, that really hurt, then you can use actually an exclamation point if you want, and then continue the sentence. But in most cases, I think you're going to want to use a comma because that's a little less severe. It means, oh, that's interesting, but it's not, the greatest thing I've ever heard. Whereas if you use an exclamation point, it would be like, oh, that is important. That is something I did not know. So, again, it's a little discretionary one again, but a common mistake, again, that you'll see. So, the reason we're talking about this is mostly for your reading comprehension, so that when you're reading, you see the comma, you pause, you ask yourself, why is the comma there? You ask yourself, do I understand what I just read in the rest of the phrase or clause? And then you move on. Also, I want you to be better writers, and so I want you to know when to use commas and when not to use commas in your writing. So those are the two reasons why we're looking at commas today. So I will be posting a comma assignment on IXL. Hopefully we won't have any problems of signing into IXL. If you do, let me know and we'll figure it out. But again, that won't be due until Friday. I want to give you plenty of time to work on it. Because it's important, and I want to make sure you understand it. Okay, so that's commas. That's our first tool or skill for smarter reading. All right, I will see you tomorrow. We're going to talk about a different type of skill, and in the meantime, read something. All right, thanks, guys.